I kept the dress, the dark blue wedding dress, the one that hung from a nail on my bedroom door the week before I married, because in an Amish house there are no closets, and that is how a wedding waits. I am Sadie, and this is Hannah the Amish girl. People drive through Lancaster County and smile at the buggies, and they do not see what a girl is told before she is married, and what she is never told. I was 19. I had knelt and been baptized at 18, which in our world is the vow that binds you and makes you bannable forever. And the week before my hook sight, my mother gave me 7 words at the kitchen table. 7. That was the whole of my preparation for the most disorienting night of my life. I will tell you those 7 words, and I will tell you what that night was, and what it cost me, 2 children I can no longer reach, and a name read out into the silence of the ban. But first you have to understand the house I am taking you into, a house built on a silence so complete that a woman's own body was the one thing no one would name. Before I go on, I want to say something to you, wherever you are. Stay with me. Not for any number, but because somewhere tonight a girl is being handed those same 7 words, and your voice is how she learns there was another way. So tell me, were you ever taught that wanting something for yourself was pride? That a good woman makes herself small? Say it so the next girl hears it. The week before I married Jonas Lapp, the dark blue dress already hung from a nail on my bedroom door. We have no closets, so a dress on a nail is how a wedding waits in an Amish house. I had sewn it myself by lamplight, the plain way, no buttons, only straight pins, the hem below the knee. Every time I passed it that week, I touched the cloth, and I told myself the fluttering in my chest was joy, because I did not have another word for it. I was 19 years old, and I thought I knew what I was walking toward. I knew the shape of it, anyway. I knew there would be roast chicken and creamed celery and 7 kinds of pie, and near 300 people on my father's farm, the benches carried in on the bench wagon, the men on one side and the women on the other. I knew Bishop Christ King would preach, and that there would be no rings, because we wear our marriage on no finger. I knew Jonas would be there in his black, his serious mouth that almost never smiled, the second son of a dairy family 3 farms over. We had ridden home from the singings together. We had sat through 2 bundling visits in my parents' front room, fully clothed, nearly silent, a girl and a boy who barely knew how to speak to one another. My father had decided it was suitable, and once Amos Esch decided a thing, the matter was closed. That is how it worked, and I want you to understand that I did not think it was wrong. I had knelt the summer before and been baptized, 18 years old, my knees on the hard floor, taking the vow of obedience to God and to the Ordnung. That vow is the most serious thing in our world. It is the door that locks behind you, the thing that makes you bannable forever after. I took it gladly. I wanted to be good, and being good, for a girl in our Gemay, meant one long lesson repeated 1,000 quiet ways. Gelassenheit. Yieldedness. You make yourself small. You do not want loudly. You bend. They taught me that being good meant making myself smaller until there was nothing left of me to refuse with. I did not hear it as cruelty. I heard it as love. My mother smelled of wood smoke and the lye soap she made with her own hands, and when she taught me to put up 48 quarts of tomatoes in an afternoon, in a kitchen hot as a furnace, that was love. When she taught me to keep my cap pinned just so over hair that had never once been cut, that was love. I had no reason to think the lessons about being a wife would be any different. I should tell you what I knew of Jonas, which was almost nothing, and that was considered proper. A courtship in our world is not two people learning one another. It is two families in the same circuit of districts deciding a thing is suitable. We had ridden home in his buggy after the Sunday singings, the clop and sway of it on the dark 2-lane road, and we had said so little to each other that I could have counted the sentences on my 2 hands. He had spoken to my father before he ever spoke seriously to me. I knew he rose at 4 to the milking, same as every steady young man a father points to. I knew his hands were quiet and his mouth was serious, and from that, from buggy rides and silence and my father's nod, I was supposed to build a marriage and a life and a body shared with a stranger. I did not question it. Questioning was not a thing a demutic girl did. So the dress hung on the nail, and the days came down, and I sewed, and I cooked, and I helped my mother and my younger sister Rebecca ready the house. Rebecca was barely more than a child then, watching me with big eyes, and I did not yet understand that she was only the next girl in line. I thought I was happy. I want to be honest with you, because honesty is the only thing I have left to give. I thought the fluttering was happiness. I had never been given the language to tell the difference between joy and fear. In our house, those two things wore the same plain dress, and no one ever taught me to tell them apart. A woman wrote to me once to say our life looked so peaceful from the road. I want to take you back further now, into the silence I was raised inside, because that peace she saw was the silence, and the silence is the whole of this story. People think the hard thing about being Amish is the work, the no electricity, the buggy out in the rain. It is not. The hard thing is what is never said. There is an architecture to that silence, built as careful as a barn, and the weight it carried was a girl's own body. I was taught nothing. I want to be plain about that. By the time I married, I had finished my schooling at the one-room school at 14, 8th grade, the end of it. I knew scripture and sums and how to write a fair hand in English. I knew how to deliver a calf and how to set bread and how to scrub a floor on my knees. About my own body, about what marriage would ask of it, about what was about to happen to me, I knew almost nothing, and the nothing was not an accident. It was a teaching. A girl who knows too much might want, and wanting in a woman has a name in our world. Hochmut, pride, the chief sin. A want could be named Hochmut, and a no could be named Hochmut, and so we learned not to want and not to say no before we even knew what those things were. The men were ordained by the lot, and they preached Demut, humility, and a good woman was a humble one, and we drank it in like well water. At my own wedding, the bishop preached that a wife submits to her husband as the church submits to Christ. He was not shouting. Bishop Christ King never shouted. He had a soft voice and a perfect certainty, and he read those words over me in front of 300 people while I sat there in my blue dress, and I bowed my head, and I thought it was beautiful. I want you to sit with that. I thought it was beautiful. There was a woman in our district. I will call her Lydia, because she is still inside, and I will not bring trouble down on her. Lydia was old when I was young. Her hands knotted from 60 years of work, and at a barn raising once, the women cooking while the men built, she was washing dishes beside me, and she said a thing I did not understand for years. She said, low, almost down into the dishwater, that on her own wedding night nobody had told her one true word either, and that she had wept, and that she had decided right then she would tell her own daughters when their time came. And then she went quiet, and she added that somehow the day always arrived, and she never could find the words, the same as her own mother never had. The silence had been handed down to her like a quilt off a bed, and she had handed it down again, and she knew it, and she could not stop her own hands. I think of Lydia more than almost anyone. She was not a cruel woman. She was a link in a chain that no one alive had forged. That was the system. Not a villain, a chain. Every woman a link. Every link handed the same silence and told it was modesty, told it was protecting her. And was Demut? Told it was protecting her. And if a woman ever did push back, no one struck her. That was not our way. Instead, the warmth simply withdrew, a little at a time, a cooler word at the quilting, a colder place at the table, the sense that you had let the cold into the house until you yielded again and called the yielding peace. That was how the Gamai taught a woman where her edges were. The silence was not an absence of something. It was load-bearing. It held the whole house up. And a girl raised inside it walks toward her wedding night the way I did, touching her blue dress on its nail, calling her fear by the name of joy, with no one, not her mother, not Lydia, not the bishop, willing to give her one honest word for what was coming. It was a Thursday in November in 2018, and I was married on my father's farm. I will not pretend I remember all of it. I remember the cold and the smell of the cleaned-out barn with the partition walls taken down for the benches, and creamed celery, and the long, wordless drag of the low bleed out of the ausbund. No instruments, only voices pulling that ancient tune as slow as molasses. I remember being tired in a way that went past my body. And then it was night, and the guests were gone, and I was 19 and a wife, and no one had prepared me for what came next. I told you I would get to that night. I promised you I would. I am here now. Here's what I can tell you, and here's what I cannot. I cannot tell you the details, and I would not, because the details were never the horror. The horror was the ignorance. The horror was two young people, a girl of 19 and a boy of 22, alone in a room with a single kerosene lamp burning low, and not one true word between them about what they were meant to do or feel or be to one another. My blue dress hung on the nail on the door. The lamp threw long, soft shadows up the plain wall. And we were children, the both of us, handed a whole life and no map for any of it. Two people who had never been allowed to be alone together, suddenly alone, each one waiting for the other to know something that neither of us had ever been told. I had my mother's 7 words. That was my preparation, the whole of it, and I have carried those 7 words for the rest of my life. The week before, at the kitchen table, she set down what she was doing, and she said to me, "A wife submits to her husband. That is what God asks." 7 words. And then she stood up and went back to the dishes, and that was the end of it. That was everything my mother had to give me, not because she did not love me, but because 7 words were all that had ever been given to her. She handed me the silence the only way she knew how, and she called it preparation. And here's the thing it took me years and an English therapist to be able to say out loud. Jonas was not cruel. I need you to hear that, because it would be so much easier if he had been a monster, and he was not. Jonas was a man raised inside the very same silence I was raised inside. No one had prepared him either. He had been handed a script. A husband leads, a wife submits, and he followed it the way he had been taught, as frightened and as ignorant as I was, with no more language for that room than I had. We were two captives who had been told that we were now master and servant, and neither of us had ever been told the truth about anything at all. In the years after, when I was exhausted past speaking, he answered me with silence, because silence was the only tool his world had ever put into his hand. There is a word for what that whole arrangement was. My therapist gave it to me slowly, the way you feed broth to someone who has not eaten in a very long time. Coercive control, she said. And then another phrase, which I had to sit with for a long time before I could hold it without flinching. Consent that is not consent, because the cost of saying no had been made unbearable long before you were ever old enough to say it. That is what the 7 words built. Not a marriage between two people who chose each other with open eyes, a room with a lamp and a dress on a nail, and 2 children who had been emptied of every word they would have needed to be gentle with one another. No one prepared me, and no one had prepared him either. That was the whole of it, and it was enough to bend 2 lives out of true. I live alone now, in a small apartment in Lancaster City, 20 minutes and a whole universe from Gordonville. I left in the autumn of last year with 1 suitcase. The band came after, the Meidung, my name read out into the quiet at the front of worship, and now my father looks through me in town as though I am made of glass, and my mother crosses to the other side of the road, and the letters go back and forth unopened. I tell you this without drama, because drama is not what it is. It is just quiet. A different quiet than the one I was raised in, but quiet all the same. I have to tell you the hardest part, and then I will let you go. I have 2 children still inside. Levi is 6 now, and Annie is 4, and they are being raised on Jonas's farm, a few miles up roads I could drive in 20 minutes and cannot walk down. I have seen them a small handful of painful times. I reach toward them through Jonas's sister, very carefully, a thread so thin it might never become more than a thread. Some of what was taken cannot be given back, and I have had to learn how to live inside that sentence without it killing me. They are being raised to fear the world I now live in, and I cannot blame the hands that raised them, because those hands were taught the same fear, in the same silence, by the same gentle voices that taught me. And I have to confess something, because I promised you the truth, and not only the parts that make me the one who was wronged. If I had stayed, I would have done it again. I would have stood at a kitchen table one day with my Annie in front of me in her own blue dress, and I would have given her 7 words, because 7 words were all I had, and I would have called it love, and I would have gone back to the dishes. I had already begun. I had already taught my children to be afraid of the very world I now live in. I was becoming a link in Lydia's chain, and the most frightening thing I have ever learned about myself is how natural it felt. The system does not need monsters. It only needs women too tired and too unprepared to break the silence, and for years I was exactly that woman. I kept the dress. The dark blue wedding dress, off its nail at last, folded in the bottom of a drawer in a city apartment where there is electric light and no one left to pin my cap. I do not keep it because I miss that day. I keep it because the girl who sewed it deserves to be remembered by somebody, and I am the only one left who will. She thought the fluttering was joy. I forgive her for not knowing the difference. No one ever taught her. So let me say the thing I wish someone had said to her, to you, to Lydia at her own dishwater 60 years ago. If you grew up in a place where your body was never your own, I see you. If you were handed 7 words and told that it was enough, I see you. If you ever lay in the dark and said yes because you were too tired to survive what no would have cost you, I see you. Your no is a whole sentence. It always was. No one ever had the right to make it unspeakable, and no one ever had the right to call your silence peace. I am not bitter at the people. My mother, Jonas, the bishop, old Lydia. They were captives passing down the only inheritance they were ever given. It is the system I will name until I have no breath left to name it with. The silence built like a barn to hold a whole world up on the bent backs of its girls. I got out with 1 suitcase and a dress I will never wear again, and a voice I was never supposed to have. If you are still deciding tonight whether your own wanting is a sin, then hear me. It is not. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.